Hi everyone, LJ Anderson here. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Raising Dragons by Bryan Davis. That's his name. And this probably will be a fairly short video. There's not a whole lot of theology to engage with, which is nice in a sense, but also it's a Christian book, so it feels weird that there's not something to really latch onto. There'll be a couple things I'll talk about, but other than that, let's get into the review. So first off, this book is basically the Arthurian legend in modern times. So it's a retelling of that legend in modern times with dragons, obviously. Otherwise, the title is very misleading, and the picture too. It would all be very misleading if it didn't have dragons, but it does have dragons. So there's that. It's like the previous books that I have done that are fiction books. It's meant for a younger audience. I would say this is like a middle grade, middle school, high school ish. I don't think it quite makes it to the young adult fiction, but as in the past, I personally don't care. I find that I can enjoy something written for young people, even like I can find enjoyment out of things like Magic Treehouse still, even though they are very simple books. They are meant to be very simple, but I can still get into them. And like I said previously, I don't know what that says about me. Maybe it's nostalgia. I feel like I need to read a children's story that I haven't read before to see if it is nostalgia or if I'm just that easy to please or if I'm, a kid at heart. I don't know. Anyway, so Raising Dragons is a simple and enjoyable book. It's much longer than like the Kingdom series. It's got some thickness to it, and that's I like that personally in a book. It means you get to read it for longer. I tend to read pretty quick, so with shorter books, I start it and I'm like, all right, well I'm done with it. A couple hours later, and what do I do now? Well, I guess I'll read the next one, but I don't know. I enjoy the thicker books more, even if they're still kids books or meant for kids. Maybe they're not kids books. One of the things I really like about this book, and this might sound a little weird, but it's got Christian themes and it's got scripture references and it talks about God. But it's not just a retelling of scripture. So it takes, a fantasy idea, this idea of what if the Arthur legends are true, but what if they're Christian, right? And it brings that forward into modern times, and it's this story of, it's a Christian-based story that, of course, is clean and doesn't have sex and cussing and all that in it, but it's not, like I said, just a retelling of a scriptural story or something like that. I enjoy those. I actually have a review coming up on a book like that, another one, because that's what a lot of Christian authors do, and it makes sense. But, it can get old to an extent. I know some people really dislike the Christian book genre or Christian fantasy genre because it's so common to have this theme. It's refreshing to have somebody who comes along and is like, hey, I have an idea for a book that I want to be Christian without it being, hey, this is a Bible story. So that was nice. I actually really enjoyed that aspect of this book. So there are two drawbacks, maybe potential drawbacks is what I'll say. The first one is that there is a prophecy at the beginning of this book, or it's not right at the beginning, but it's pretty early on. And this prophecy, it tells the future. Go figure. But it tells the future, kind of in a riddle form, but it's not a hard riddle. It's pretty easy to figure out what's going to happen based off of that. And so, in a sense, maybe it's because I'm, older and I'm not the target audience. But after reading that, I was like, oh, well, this is how this plays out, right? If this prophecy comes true, then it's going to play out, this way. Is that a problem? I don't know. I don't think it's a problem. It might take away some enjoyment for people if it feels like they're being spoiled. Like if the book's spoiled to them, then it might be a problem. I don't seem to care. I mean, I'm somebody who will reread the same book 10 times if I like it. I've watched the Lord of the Rings movies a lot of times, at least 25 times through all of them. And I don't seem to tire of things that I like. So maybe that's not a problem for me, but it could be a problem for somebody else. Second, it's generally a theologically sound book, but it doesn't really engage with a whole lot of theology. Like I said, there are scripture references. There is talk about God, but it's not theologically dense. Not that I expected it to be, but it's almost a pure fiction book. I don't want to get into it too much, but I am working on a fantasy book that I very much want it to teach things while being a fun fantasy story. This book doesn't really seem to have that. It seems to be, it's a clean Christian book that has Christian themes, and that's kind of it. I don't know if that's good or not. I don't know if that's. I think it's neutral. It's like it doesn't have a whole lot of theology to really teach somebody something, but it also isn't detracting from it in any way. So it is what it is. But there is one aspect of that is a little weird. Like I said, there was a prophecy at the beginning of this. In a true fantasy book that wasn't set in our world, I don't think there'd be a problem. But this is a fantasy book set in our world that uses our scriptures. Everything is ours, minus the fact that there are dragons, and this legend appears to be true. But then there's this prophecy that comes in, and it's a prophecy that happens, outside of Scripture. Now, I'm not going to go into whether or not, prophecy has continued. I personally believe it has, but I also believe that it has changed somewhat. Like I said, I'm not going to go into that. But the way that the prophecy is laid out is like, this is a world-changing event that is being prophesied. And if you think about it too much, it brings up the question, is the canon of Scripture closed, or should a prophecy like this be included in it? And that, it could potentially cause problems. Like, I don't know who's getting their theological advice from a children's, or, a young adults fantasy book, but you'd be surprised how much what we read, what we consume, if we're not thinking about it, can affect how we view things and believe things. And so even in a Christian book like this, it's good to go, okay, so this kind of seems like it's it's Scripture, that it should be a part of the canon of Scripture, but it's not, and that's something that you and I need to be aware of. Like, the canon of Scripture is closed. That type of prophecy of this whole, like, like there's this big, God is revealing the future to the whole world for something, is definitely a Scripture thing that doesn't happen anymore. And that's kind of, well, I said I wasn't going to get into this, but I guess here we go. The canon of Scripture is closed. As such, prophecy cannot include these big whole world type things. We have the ending of the world in Revelation, and Genesis to Revelation all fit everything in between them. We are done with more Scripture, right? And so this is something that we need to be careful of. I do believe that prophecy is still active today, but I believe it is in a different way. Like, we don't get big prophecies that should be in the Bible or should be added to the Bible. Those are no longer happening, and just be aware of that, right? Like I said, in a true fantasy series that, if it has a Bible, it's a different version of it. Like, they're trying to make a Bible-like thing, and this is in it, I don't think it would be a problem whatsoever. But because this is a world that has an actual Bible, that's, it's our world, just slight tweaks, then it can cause problems. But one of the things that I actually really enjoyed from a theological perspective is something that the characters quote. So I want to read a quote to you real quick, and it's really a beautiful quote. I'll just read it. Professor Hamilton looked over Billy's shoulder. Good idea. You cannot understand the new without the old, right, William? This is in reference to the New and Old Testaments, and there's a brief conversation that happens here that's more than just what I quoted for you, but it's so true. The New Testament is not a new covenant in the sense that it totally gets rid of the old covenant and is now this whole new separate thing. The new covenant is fundamentally built on the Old Testament, on the Old Covenant. We cannot understand the New Covenant well or fully if we don't understand the Old Covenant. That is something that you don't see a whole lot of people, Christians, arguing for or teaching. And when I hit that in this book, I was like, heck yeah, let's go. I really like that he included that idea in this book. It fits in the story just perfectly fine, but it's a concept that I think we would do really well to remember. So there's that. I said this was going to be a short one. It's already longer than my previous video, so there's that. I get talking too much sometimes, I guess. Anyway, so I will end it there. I absolutely recommend this book. I don't know how much people will like it as much as I do if you're as old as I am or older, because it's younger. It's for younger people. But if you're anything like me, you're a kid at heart or something. I still don't know why I don't have an issue with them, but I do. I don't. I would fully recommend giving it a read. I would give it. I'd say a 4.5 out of 5 stars, just because there is some question there on the theology, but really, the theology and And, it's a little too simplistic in some areas for my personal liking. But overall, I think it's a great book, and I would highly recommend it. Before I sign off, though, I would like to mention that guy right there. That is my book that was just released in this November. It's Theology and Apologetics, an examination of how and where they intersect. It is a book, what the title says. It's a scholarly but accessible book that was originally meant to be a journal article that really engages with the idea that apologetics, as we do it today, is too narrow for how we actually, how logic and scripture treats the topic. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, I will link the books below. And also stay tuned. I have another book coming out. It's actually available for pre-order right now. If you want to check it out, it's called Contending for the Truth, a biblical look at 13 contentious doctrines. And so that one is available for pre-order. It will come out on February 7th, but I will release a longer video about that later. So that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching, and God bless.